Here's a fact that flips everything you thought you knew about alcohol. The human body's ability to break down ethanol started evolving not thousands, but 10 million years ago, long before humans existed, long before beer, wine, or whiskey, back when our ancestors were still apes climbing through trees. So we didn't invent the craving for alcohol, we inherited it. Today we're going to figure out when humans first made alcohol on purpose, and more importantly, why. When did humanity start drinking alcohol? Spoiler, the answer doesn't start with humans. It starts with apes chasing rotten fruit. In the year 2000, biologist Robert Dudley from Berkeley proposed a theory that later became known as the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. Here's the idea. Ripe, overripe fruit naturally ferments and starts releasing ethanol. For primates living in the treetops and feeding on fruit, the smell of alcohol was a signal, meaning food is here and it's ripe. Individuals whose bodies were better at picking up that smell and better at processing alcohol gained an evolutionary edge. They found food faster and absorbed calories more efficiently. Scientists confirmed this genetically by studying the ADH4 gene, which codes for a key enzyme involved in breaking down alcohol across 28 mammal species, including 17 primates. It turned out that a sharp jump in the efficiency of this enzyme happened in the common ancestor of humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas, roughly 10 million years ago. So our craving for alcohol isn't a character flaw. It's a built-in biological program for finding calories, inherited from ancestors who lived in the trees. But there's a difference between inheriting the ability to process alcohol and deliberately learning to make it. That's where archaeology takes over from biology. And the earliest direct evidence that humans intentionally made alcohol isn't from Egypt or Mesopotamia, like many people assume. It comes from a cave in what is now Israel. The Raqefet Cave is located near Haifa. Archaeologists found burial sites there belonging to the Natufians, a group of hunter-gatherers who lived in the eastern Mediterranean around 13,000 years ago. Researchers from Stanford analyzed residue on stone mortars inside the cave and found clear evidence of beer brewing. But here's the important part. This wasn't beer as we know it today. According to researcher Stephen Batyuk from the University of Toronto, it was something between porridge and a thick gruel, far from what we pour into a glass today. Even more interesting is why they made it. Scientists believe the Natufians weren't brewing this beer for pleasure, and not because they had surplus grain. They made it for ritual feasts, to honor deceased members of their community. This is worth pausing on, because it overturns the classic theory that alcohol appeared as a byproduct of agriculture. The idea that people started growing grain, ended up with a surplus, and fermented it out of convenience. Here, it's the opposite. The Natufians weren't farming yet. Alcohol appeared before agriculture, as part of spiritual and ritual life. It's possible that the desire for these rituals is exactly what pushed people toward domesticating grain in the first place. Let's move to China, to the Yellow River Valley, to the Neolithic village of Jiahu. Molecular archaeologist Patrick McGovern from the University of Pennsylvania, along with his team, ran chemical analysis on residue from ancient pottery and found that as early as the 7th millennium BC, around 9,000 years ago, people there were producing a mixed fermented beverage made from rice, honey, and fruit, including hawthorn and possibly grapes. This is one of the earliest documented alcoholic recipes in human history, and notably, people weren't just fermenting whatever was on hand. They were deliberately combining ingredients to achieve a specific taste. At a site called Qiaotou, also in China, researchers found another confirmation. Beer brewing dating back roughly 9,000 years, discovered in the context of a funeral ritual, at a platform mound containing human burials. The beer was made from rice and other plants, and appears to have been used in burial ceremonies. Notice the pattern? In the Middle East and in China, independently of each other, the first alcohol shows up linked to death, ritual, and remembrance of the dead. Not to harvest celebrations, to funerals. Once people in different parts of the world settled down and began growing grain, alcohol production stopped being a rare ritual event and became systematic. Archaeologists can trace this with real precision because ancient containers preserve residues of tartaric acid found in wine. Using these traces, we can see that the earliest confirmed findings in China date to around the 7th millennium BC, with similar traces appearing somewhat later in Iran and around the Mediterranean. And depictions on statuettes and wall paintings show that thousands of years before our era, beer and wine in Mesopotamia, Assyria, Babylon, and Crete were no longer a rare luxury but part of everyday life. Literally everyday food, since beer was often seen not as a drink meant to get you drunk, but as a nutritious, calorie-dense staple. And now, the most provocative twist in this story. There's a hypothesis that sounds almost absurd at first, that it wasn't agriculture that led to beer, but the desire for beer that pushed people toward agriculture. Here's the reasoning. Hunter-gatherers did just fine without cultivated grain. Growing wheat and barley is hard, labor-intensive work with unpredictable results. So why make that switch at all? One possible answer: for the ritual feasts we just talked about. For the beer and fermented drinks that bonded communities, supported ceremonies honoring the dead, and gave people a reason to gather in large groups. And for that, people may have been willing to take on the risk and burden of domesticating grain. This isn't a proven fact. It's one of several competing hypotheses in archaeology. But it's compelling enough to raise an uncomfortable question. What if the foundation of civilization itself, cities, agriculture, writing, grew not only out of the need to survive, but out of the desire to gather together and drink? If we pull together everything archaeology tells us, ancient alcohol served at least 4 major functions. First, ritual. We already saw this in Rockafet Cave and at Chao To. Alcohol accompanied funerals, ancestor worship, and connection to the spiritual world. Second, social bonding. Drinking together was, and still is, one of the oldest and most reliable ways to strengthen a group, ease social tension, and build trust between people. Third, medicine. For nearly all of written history, alcohol was used as an antiseptic, a painkiller, and a base for tinctures and remedies, long before modern pharmaceuticals existed. Fourth, simple pleasure. Starting with that very smell of fermenting fruit picked up by our primate ancestors, alcohol stimulates the brain's pleasure centers. That was true 10 million years ago, and it's still true today. So, back to the question we started with. When did humanity begin drinking alcohol? If we're talking about deliberate production, it's at least 13,000 years ago in a cave in what is now Israel, and almost simultaneously in China. But if we're talking about the biological craving for alcohol, it's far, far older in us. Older than the human species itself. Older than language, tools, or fire. It comes from a tropical forest where survival depended on who could smell a fermenting fruit first. We didn't just learn to drink. We may have been built for it, long before we ever became human. If you enjoyed this journey into the history of human habits, subscribe. There are many more topics like this coming. And let me know in the comments, which human habit should I dig into next?